Hello and welcome back to my channel In Search of Wonder. My name is Anne and today I'm going to choose my next read by using the try a chapter tag. So it looks like a lot of people use the try a chapter tag for unhauling books, which would be fun to do and a useful exercise. And that's how I've mostly seen it done before, but recently, actually just today I believe, Kate Howe posted a video where she did the try a chapter tag for choosing her next read, which is even more fun. Right now I am very close to being finished with Little Dorrit, which I've been reading since September and enjoying it very much, but I need to read something next after that. I have a couple other things in progress also already, but one, there's a good chance I'm going to DNF it, and the other I don't think will take me an awfully long time to finish. So since it's Victober and my entire TBR is made of books that are either Victorian by Victorian authors or set in Victorian times, I'm going to do one from each of those categories. I'm going to choose a book that is a classic written by a Victorian author, and I'm going to choose a book that is not a classic but is set in Victorian times. So all of these, with the exception of one or two that I think I am reading digitally through the library, all of these are on my Kindle. The exciting thing is Tiffany at Beautiful Minutia recently posted about the November reading Project Gutenberg readathon. The words are coming slowly. Which I am very excited about. I was on Project Gutenberg when they first started, you know, back when the internet was young, and I remember finding it honestly a little bit unwieldy and difficult to use and difficult to read from, but they've come a long way, baby. I started poking around there after Tiffany made that announcement, and I've already downloaded like 5 things. So among the things that I have downloaded are 3 of my options by Victorian authors. These are all from my Victober TBR, which if you have not seen that video, I will link to it in the description box below. But those 3 videos are East Lynne, which is by a brand new author to me, Mrs. Henry Wood, I believe is her last name. And she has her own first name. At the moment, I forget what it is. But anyways, East Lynne. And then A Dark Night's Work by Elizabeth Gaskell, which is a shorter one by her, and then 3 Men in a Boat. So I am going to be reading 1 chapter of each of those books and then deciding whichever one is most compelling to me in the moment. I will read that will be my next read when I am finished with Little Dorrit. So I always try to have like a classic or a non-fiction book going, which requires a little more effort, a little more paying attention, a little more diligence in the reading. And I also always try to have a light read in progress, just balance, because sometimes I'm just too tired to think, but I still want to read to relax, so I just want to read something light and easy. So I always have one of each going. So for my lighter reads, the options are John Eyre, which is by Mimi Matthews and is a retelling of Jane Eyre with a twist. So that is very intriguing to me. It does have some like supernatural elements in it, which is not my typical sort of thing that I like to read, but and also it's not typical of Mimi Matthews. So if you have read this one, let me know. And then the other one is The Lost Melody by Joanna Davidson Politano, and I've not read it. I have read several of her other books and have really enjoyed them. And then finally, The Barrister and the Letter of Mark, which I believe is a debut novel. And of those 3, I think that I am probably going to be most intrigued by John Eyre, but we'll see which first chapter is the most compelling. Of the 3 classics, I really don't know. It's a toss-up. The one author I've never heard of, Three Men in a Boat, is supposed to be very funny, and I like Elizabeth Gaskell. So who knows? We'll find out. So I'm gonna go read them and see which one will be my next read. The first chapters of the 6 books, and it's actually proving to be a bit of a difficult decision. So, well, let's run through everything that happened in the books. So, for East Lynne, we set the stage with a middle-aged man working in his office who has gout. And in comes a 27-year-old young man who is a barrister or attorney, you know, a man of law, a lawyer of some sort. And he comes in and is requesting to buy a property from the first gentleman, who is, by the way, an earl. So, noisy kids. So he is offering to buy this property, and then he meets the Earl's daughter and is struck by how beautiful she is. And yeah, that's the first chapter. So then, did I say East Lynne was the property that he was hoping to purchase? So, and that's the name of the book, East Lynne. So that's the first one. Then the next one that I read was Dark Night's Work by Elizabeth Gaskell. And by the way, interestingly, every single book I read today, except for one, was from the perspective, either first or third person, of a man. Interesting. That actually doesn't happen super often in the books that I normally read. But anyways, so in the second one, A Dark Night's Work by Elizabeth Gaskell, we again have an older and a younger man, but the focus quickly shifts to the younger man, who is the son in this case. And again, we have attorneys, barristers. I'm sorry, I can't ever remember the difference. They're one of them. Lawyer people. And so they're not part of the gentility, the nobility, but the father's business started by his grandfather, his lawyerly business, has made him very wealthy. So the son was raised went to school, Eton and Oxford, Cambridge, one of those. So he, went to school with the local gentry, but he isn't one of them. But his father manages to finagle him into the local assembly, where only the gentlemen go. And he's there at the local assembly, and a duchess and her daughters arrive towards the end of the assembly, and they want to dance the waltz, which is a new thing. So, by the way, this book was written by Elizabeth Gaskell. Sorry, little rabbit trail here. It was written in Victorian times by Gaskell. But at the very beginning, she says it's 40 years prior, which I think puts us in late Regency or very early Victorian. So at this point, the waltz is fairly new and something that's really only done in London. But then in this smaller town assembly, the Duchess's daughters want to dance the waltz. So not all of the men present know how to dance it. So this lawyer's son, because he has been on the continent, has learned how to dance the waltz. And so suddenly everybody wants to dance with him because he's one of the few gentlemen there who knows how to dance the waltz. And so he makes an impression on all the local ladies in the assembly. And that's where that one ends. Then we have 3 men in a boat and a dog. And so I read that first chapter, and it definitely made me chuckle. It is in the first person, and I don't know the name of the narrator. He just refers to himself as myself, logically enough, and does not introduce himself, at least in the first chapter. So I don't know if we ever find out his name. But he is a hypochondriac. But what made me chuckle was he references recently having seen an advertisement for liver pills. And so all of the symptoms on the advertisement, he is quite sure he has. And so he's very sure that he is, has a liver disease. And then he talks about how one time he was reading in a medical book, and he read through all of the diseases, A through Z, and the only one he did not have was housewife's knee, whatever housewife's knee is. But he had every single other illness in there. So, yeah, a bit of a hypochondriac. But apparently all 3 of the gentlemen in question are hypochondriacs. But really, as we come to find out, according to the narration, really they just don't want to work. They're just lazy. So they want to go, they need some rest to recover from their various illnesses, see my quotes. So they decide to go on a trip down the river. So I haven't gotten to the part yet where they're in a boat, but I believe that's coming next. So which of those 3 to pick? I think I'm going to go with 3 men in a boat because it did make me chuckle, and it's the shorter of the 3, and because the other 3 books that I picked are all pretty heavy with drama, so I think it would be a nice balance to have something lighter and funny in progress while I have a heavier book. So that brings me to my non-Victorian options. So my 3 non-Victorian options were John Eyre and what was the other one? Oh yes, The Lost Melody and The Barrister and The Letter of Marque. So beginning with John Eyre, we set the scene where John Eyre is at the graveside the funeral just having been performed of Lady Helen. Ooh, what is her last name? I wrote some things down because I knew that if I read so many things in a short time, I wouldn't even be able to differentiate from one to the other. Lady Helen Burns. So, of course, in the actual Jane Eyre, Helen Burns is Jane's friend who dies at the school where they attend. And is a very emotional scene in that book. And one of those life-defining moments for Jane Eyre in the story. So that's where Jane Eyre starts as an adult, with Lady Helen Burns, also an adult, having just died. And it seems like it was a suicide and had something to do with a nasty husband who, along with Reverend Brocklehurst, if you remember that name, are accusing Jane Eyre of adultery. But in the narrative, he insists that there was no such thing, that he had no interest in Lady Helen Burns in that way. He was just trying to be a friend to her, an ally, I guess, if you will, against her nasty husband. So there's implication of abuse or whatever, but I'm not exactly sure what the story is with Lady Helen Burns and her husband. So he is on his way to Thornfield Hall, where he has been hired by a Mr. Fairfax to tutor two young boys, ages 6 and 7. And he is in the carriage on the way to Thornfield Hall from the train station, driven by the coachman, when he sees in the mist a ghostly female figure signaling him to stop and not to go further. But the coachman doesn't see said ghostly figure. So either it's a figment of his imagination, or it's a ghost, or it was a hallucination, perhaps induced by the laudanum that he has started taking more and more. So far, not a very sympathetic character, in the sense that I'm kind of like, you've got issues, son. Stop at the laudanum, okay? It's not good for you. Anyways, so that's Jane Eyre. And then we have, why can I not remember the name of this book? I just read it. The Lost Melody. The Lost Title also. Anyway, so The Lost Melody had a prologue. So I read the prologue and I read the first chapter. And in the prologue, in the first person narrative, this person, narrating the story, unnamed, is groggily waking up from being in some kind of drug-induced, like medical drug-induced stupor in an asylum, and she's hearing two doctors discuss her case over her head. And then she hears them leave, or she thinks she hears them leave, so she tries to get up to escape, because she doesn't want to be in an asylum because she's not crazy. But she doesn't realize that one of the doctors is still there. And he tells her that her father is responsible for putting her in the asylum. Then we get to the next chapter. She is not in an asylum. I'm not sure if it's a different year. I need to look. I don't know if the prologue was dated. 3 months earlier than the prologue. So it is the same person, pretty sure. Okay, so 3 months earlier in Manchester, she finds out that her father has passed away. So then how does he send her to the asylum? Posthumously. How does that work? There's much to be discovered in this story, I perceive. Anyways, so she is in their workshop where they repair pianos, but she is also herself a concert pianist. And so she finds out that her father has just passed away, which was not wholly unexpected, and she's feeling a little bit guilty because mostly she just feels relieved that he is gone. And then a gentleman comes and joins her and sits next to her at the piano, and it seems that they have a relationship of some kind, probably one that was not sanctioned by said father, but now they have a way free before them since he is gone, and so there's allusions to a possible future. What's interesting here is that the main character, she has like this soundtrack of music in her mind to everything, that's happening to her. So Berlioz's Symphonie Fantastique is mentioned, and she describes herself at the end. She says, at the end of the first chapter, she says, "Few people actually knew me, as it turned out. I was a Chopin nocturne, surprising, complex, and impossible to master." I like that. But she also, a Beethoven sonata she also mentions hearing. Anyway, so there's like a musical background soundtrack to her life as things are going on. So what's interesting is, in this book and the third book I'm going to mention, The Barrister and the Letter of Mark, both of the main characters hear music as like a soundtrack to their life. Weird, right? Like, I don't know who came first and which one had the idea first, if they copied each other, they didn't know about each other, but interesting. So then that brings us to the third book, The Barrister and the Letter of Mark, which also had a prologue. So I read the prologue, and then I read half of the first chapter because I was running out of time. Plus, that chapter had like multiple different perspectives in it going on. So I read the first two sections of the chapter, and then there was another one. It was just a few too many pages I didn't have time for, and I was like, well, anyways, I've read enough. So for now. So in this one, we have a young man, again, perspective of a male. So the Lost Melody is the only one that is a female narrator, so, or female perspective, because they're not all first person. Some of them are third person, but from the perspective of a guy. So in this one, we have a young man who he comes home from college to his father to confront his father about the fact that one of the young girls on his estate was sent away by her relatives because she was found to be a child. And the son knows that the father is responsible for this, so he's come to confront the father. What is this with the dastardly fathers? There are a lot of dastardly fathers in these stories. So anyways, he fights with his father. His father actually punches him and says, "You're disinherited, and get out of my house, out of my life, blah blah blah." And so he leaves, and he becomes a barrister. There's a lot of barristers in these stories too. So he becomes a barrister, and so we fast forward to when he has successfully launched his career. And then we follow the trail of some important papers, which are not described as to what they are exactly, but a servant girl steals them from the one of the Prince Regents. So yeah, this one was actually set in late Regency, rather than Victorian, whatever. But anyways, she steals it from one of the Prince Regent's homes. She's a servant there, and she hands it off to her handler, who is a thief or whatever, and then he hands it off to a courier delivery boy, who slides it under the door of a solicitor's office. What's it? Solicitors, barristers, attorneys? Girl can't keep track of these. Anyway, so, and then we shift the scene again to on board a ship and the sea captain. And that's where I was like, okay, I don't have any more time for this one. And I had already decided by this point that there were things about it that I liked. Like, I liked the prologue. I mean, it opened with a punch. It was very dramatic and really set the scene. But then the shifting perspectives and some of the dialogue just seemed a little it wasn't flowing for me. And so I was not as much into the story as I was into the other two. So of these three, I think that I'm going to go with The Lost Melody, because at this point I feel like that's the one I'm the most wanting to know. Why did her father put her in the asylum? How did her father put her in the asylum posthumously? How does that work? What is she going to do with her life now that her father is gone? Does she get out of the asylum? And the blurb made it sound like, not like she was in the asylum, that it was someone else. So maybe it is two different narrators going on here. There's a lot of questions and mysteries to be solved here that I'm really wondering about. So I am still wrapping up Little Dorrit. I will get that done soon. But then I am going to read Three Men in a Boat. I'll finish that one. That will be my next read. And so, there we go. The try a chapter tag. That was fun. I'm going to have to do that again sometime. Very enjoyable. So, tell me what you are reading for Victober or otherwise, just whatever you have got going on, and let me know which of these intrigues you that you would be interested in reading if you haven't already. And if you have read one of the ones I'm going to read, let me know your thoughts about it. And I will talk to you next time.